Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. I'm going to be taking a look at the featured aspect for the week starting Saturday, December 6th, which of course means I'm going to be talking about Mars square Saturn, because that is happening this week. And there really is so much that can be said about an aspect like Mars square Saturn. We've got Mars in Sagittarius, squaring Saturn in Pisces. So I want to explore some of the qualities, the kinds of energy, and even the different types of choices you might be navigating right now. Before we do, I want to make sure you know all about my personal predictions retreat happening in Palm Springs this January. Join me for a 3-day intensive where you'll learn about secondary progressions, including the progressed lunar phase. And as we dive into progressions, you will discover what your progressions might indicate for you in 2026. I'll also guide you through some of the most important transits that are happening in 2026 and give you lots of support about how you can apply those transits to your own chart. So this is going to give you lots of insight about the trends and the timing cycles that are happening in your chart and therefore in your life in the year ahead. If you'd like to join me on Astrology Retreat in Palm Springs, check out the calendar page on my website at kellysastrology.com for more information. I will include the direct link to the event in the show notes below. The Palm Springs Personal Predictions Retreat is hosted by Astrology University. The early bird registration rate expires on December 31st. So if you are thinking to join us, I'd encourage you to sign up before then to get the best deal. All right, team, let's get back to this Mars square Saturn aspect. First off, let's cover off the essentials. Mars will square Saturn from 25 Sagittarius to 25 Pisces, and it's happening on Monday, December 8th or Tuesday, December 9th, depending on where you are in the world. So December 8th or 9th, we are under that Mars square Saturn aspect. Now, if we go a little further with this technical piece, the aspect does peak at the start of the week, Monday, Tuesday. But if we use that 3-degree orb from Hellenistic astrology that points us to maximum aspect intensity, the window of time in which you might be feeling this Mars square Saturn aspect actually extends from December 4th all the way through to December 13th. It's in that time frame that Mars is within that 3-degree range of the square to Saturn. And so as much as I'm talking about an aspect that peaks on December 8th or 9th, you may be feeling it a few days before or even for a few days after those exact dates. Now, I don't say that to bring you down or to make you worry about more than you need to, but rather so that we all have this understanding that for an aspect like Mars square Saturn, it doesn't pass as quickly as an aspect like Moon Saturn or Mercury Saturn might pass. So that combination of Mars and Saturn, Mars is a slower moving planet relative to all the other fast moving planets, if you like. And so it does last, this good solid week period. So that's a little bit about the technical elements of the degrees Mars is squaring Saturn, the signs, the dates, and, how to work an orb into your timeline. But I imagine what you're really wanting to know is all of that's great. What is it that I can expect? What should I be looking for? What are some of the things that I might be grappling with or working through as Mars negotiates this kind of heavy meeting with Saturn? So I should also say that Mars makes these more intense aspects to Saturn a couple of times a year. So whether it's a Mars square Saturn or a Mars conjunct Saturn or even a Mars opposite Saturn, we have a couple of them a year. So while it is important in the context of the astrology of not just this week, but actually the whole month of December, it is something that we're also familiar with. So you've been through these types of aspects before, just to give you that little perspective note as well. But this aspect is a heavier aspect for Mars because we have Saturn applying a bit of pressure, bringing a bit of a reality check. And so that does kind of put us into a little bit more of an intensive place in our lives. We might feel that in the circumstances we're dealing with, we feel a little bit like we're caught between a rock and a hard place. So with this Mars square Saturn aspect, you might feel weighed down or burdened by responsibilities and obligation. You might just feel like you are kind of under the pump or under more pressure than usual. You might have a mountain of work that you're trying to plow through, or you might feel that there's just too much in your calendar to keep on top of. So you might be getting a reality check that you have overextended, overcommitted yourself. With Mars square Saturn, there is a general quality of tension or of pressure, and you might find yourself wanting to do certain things, but actually having to do other things. It's like, I want to do this, but I can't get there until these things get sorted out. You might be aware of a deadline or a due date that you really must meet, or you might be frustrated with some delays as even your best efforts are not making a complex situation move more quickly. So some of us are going to be feeling the pressure of choice and that lack of time or energy. Some of us are feeling the time pressure from coming up against like a deadline or an expiry date that we don't have the power to change. And some of us are going to be just grappling with delays that are slowing things down when we're trying to get things done. So you might find yourself working through choices around, what's urgent versus what's important, the idea of what is calling your attention now versus what isn't super urgent right now, but if you get it done, is going to be a gift to your future self. So we might come back to that idea in a minute. When I think about Mars square Saturn, one of the visuals that always comes to mind is this idea of bumping into a wall. And I mean this from the perspective of you're just kind of powering on, maybe you're walking down the street or you're driving down the road, and you kind of come to a barrier, you come to a blockage that prevents you moving in the way you had intended. So that means you might have to stop, you might have to slow down, you might have to reassess or restructure. Reassessing and restructuring are really great Saturn words. And when we have this square aspect from Mars to Saturn, we are having to make adjustments to our original intentions, our original timelines, or even our original expectations. This kind of image of bumping into a wall with Mars and Saturn, it might be, you're driving along and then you have to slow down for a checkpoint of some kind. And then you have to explain your mission or your plan to the authority figure. Maybe you have to prove your documents or credentials are valid so that you can keep going. And all of that requires a thoroughness that you might feel that you don't have time for. And so while this is Mars square Saturn aspect, it can be about addressing what's necessary. It can be about being more thorough than it might be if left to your own devices. All of this takes time and certainly can delay or slow your progress. And from the perspective of Mars, that's very frustrating. The other side of it is that this thoroughness might actually help you confirm that you're on the right track, like double checking or reviewing. And it can help you kind of figure out that you haven't missed anything. We said we would get to here and that it would include achieving all these things. Is that where we're at? Do we need to, reconsider? And so this idea of powering along and then bumping into a barrier, it might feel like you're sort of pulled up a bit short. When I think about Mars and Saturn, there are a lot of differences between these two planets. And so when Mars and Saturn come into a more intensive type of aspect, like a conjunction, an opposition, or the square, like we're experiencing in this second week of December, you might find yourself having to kind of mediate between that push from Mars or the pressure from Saturn, as if you're trying to figure out which of these kind of planetary motifs you're going to decide to kind of let come through or let influence your decision making. And, in the moment, in terms of, this first weekend in December or rolling into the second week of the month, it can really feel like you're slowing down, that you're having to make choices about what is going to happen and what's not going to happen. And so from the perspective of Mars, that frustration about delays or kind of methodical processes that are slowing you down, that's very true. But Saturn has a different perspective, and Saturn's perspective is, I'm trying to ensure that your efforts continue to be directed to that which truly matters. And that means I want you to go slower so that you don't miss things, but also that you can do things to the high standard we need. Saturn is also invested in checking in to make sure that you are ultimately on track to end up somewhere that you really want to go. And this is where you can start to see the tension between these differing perspectives and priorities of Mars and Saturn. So you might be in a situation in your life where somebody is being Mars and somebody is being Saturn. There may be a situation with someone in your life where you feel like you're Mars. Can we rush? Can we get it done fast, fast, fast? And you're negotiating with someone who wants to slow down, take more time, go back to the drawing board. In a different area of your life, you might be the Saturn person that's saying, can we think about this? Can we do a little bit more research? You might be expressing hesitation or caution. I'm not ready to commit yet. Can we revisit this in a week or two, or maybe next month? And the person you're dealing with might be the Mars figure, which is, I really wanted to make a decision now. And so this is where, with a square aspect to Saturn, we feel the time pressure, particularly with Mars in the mix. This is that idea of caught between a rock and a hard place. Maybe neither of the options you're presented with are ideal, but you do have to make a decision and choose what is going to be the focus. And so even if circumstances aren't perfect, making a decision or expressing your hesitation is going to be very helpful. A Mars square Saturn aspect can prompt an uncomfortable realization. That idea where you get the reality check or you get some clarity about what will and won't be possible. Even though Saturn can feel frustrating or restraining, he's usually revealing the essence or truth of a situation. Like, it may be that you thought you could get 10 things done, by Wednesday, but the reality is, to do things well, you might get 3 or 4 things done. And, Mars in Sagittarius is very enthusiastic. It's very optimistic. It really thinks that all things are possible. And Saturn, through this aspect, is introducing this kind of voice of reason or a voice of caution. A little bit like drawing on grandparent energy. And one of the other differences between Mars and Saturn is this idea of timelines. You may be negotiating with someone about differing preferences about things happening fast or things happening slow. So we get the clarity or the reality check about what is going to be possible in what timeline. And as we get clear on those facts or that reality check, that might lead you to a place where you have to make a bit of a tough but necessary choice. So we're not loving the decisions we have to make, but we know from that wise, mature part of us, sometimes we have to make choices in less than ideal circumstances, or we have to choose between 2 less than ideal options, but we can't just stay in this kind of frozen, immobile state indefinitely. And I wonder if this is something kind of like what you're navigating now. If so, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And I touched on before this idea of like things that are urgent versus things that are important. And it reminds me of something that is called the Eisenhower Matrix for time management. And if you've never heard of this, give it a quick Google. It's a super simple but very clarifying idea about how to organize your tasks and your priorities. And in this method or idea, I guess, this approach, tasks are broken down into combinations of whether they are urgent or not, and then whether they are important or not. So something could be urgent and important. Something could be important but not urgent. Something could be not or urgent but important. I might have just said that. Something can be not urgent and not important. Like if we get to it, we get to it. And something can be like, it can be urgent and not important, or urgent and important. And then it can be important and urgent, or important and not urgent. And these different ways of thinking, urgent is like a time pressured thing, but important may be something that even though it's not pressing now, it is to our ultimate long-term benefit. And in this kind of approach or thinking, Mars tasks or desires or demands would be the more urgent ones, the things that are pressing on you that feel like a fire is going on that you need to put out right now. And Saturn tasks are not necessarily urgent, but are really important. And so the trick is, how can we stay on track with those long-term Saturn projects and priorities, even if we have to temporarily step aside to address something that has flared up or popped up short-term? So those Mars desires can feel very pressing, like you have to do them now, it's an emergency, and they may or may not be important. You know, somebody asks something of you and it could be really important for them, but when you think about all the things you're trying to manage, it may or may not be important for you. And so this idea, of a Saturn task, something that's important but maybe not urgent, this is something like saving for retirement. It's important, but there's no emergency today, and it's another way of thinking about Mars square Saturn is that idea of delayed gratification. What am I willing to do without today so that I can have something in the future? And when Saturn's in the mix, the thing in the future that we want to have is safety, protection, security. And so that idea of like a Saturn thing about saving for retirement, it's important, but maybe going out with friends to celebrate the holiday season this weekend seems more urgent and exciting. And so what is it that you choose? Anytime we have Saturn in a big square aspect, we're trying to navigate how to bring in the more mature, wise part of ourselves into our decision-making process. Mars does prefer that quick fix, that fast outcome, that immediate gratification, the one marshmallow now, not two marshmallows later, if you're familiar with that idea as well, that research. And of course, Saturn is more interested in building slowly over time. So that under the influence of Saturn, whatever you dedicate your efforts to are these lasting, kind of high quality, long-term projects and partnerships. And this might help you get to the heart of any kind of time pressures or choices that you are navigating this week. What do you want to do or enjoy now versus are you thinking about how to allocate some of your resources, which could be time, energy, or money, to things that build slowly over time? Another example might be, I'd like to just flake out and watch a movie and chill out, after work or this evening, but I know that I should go for a walk and do some movement, do some stretching, do some physical activity. Watching the movie would give me like a fun short-term feeling of enjoyment, maybe a little bit of escapism or relaxing, while going for a walk may or may not be enjoyable in the moment. I usually do enjoy an evening walk, but it does depend on the weather. We're definitely setting into winter at the moment. But certainly going for a walk or doing other physical activity, whether you enjoy it at the time or not, it is adding to your health account over time. And a little bit of physical activity done regularly adds up to, better health in the long term. So this is, hopefully a couple of examples helping you kind of understand the choices and the short-term versus the long-term Mars-Saturn conundrum that we're all essentially navigating this week. So questions around dedication and commitment, about what's important over time versus what might be pressing now, they're likely to arise this week. Maybe at the start of the week with Mars-Saturn, maybe even over the weekend, maybe by midweek, so we're just in this Mars-Saturn vibration at the moment. And with Mars under scrutiny from Saturn, you too might be called to clarify your priorities and to re-choose or recommit to who or what matters most. Even though these Mars-Saturn aspects may not feel like fun and they may put you in a position where you have to make a kind of more challenging or uncomfortable choice, usually through that process, you get clear, you have a realization, oh, if I have to choose, this is more important than that. This person or this project or this goal is more important than this other thing. And that's good to know who or what is truly important to you. When we have these squares from Saturn, it does bring up a lot about time management, about how we are allocating our time, how we're filling our days. And if you're feeling like, time is passing you by, you're not enjoying things, or you're feeling a bit worn out, there may be some short-term things you need to address immediately over the next few days, but there may be some clues and some wisdom that you can gain through reflection to help you commit to less going forward. Saturn is the ultimate planet that gives a firm no, I can't, I'm not available, I won't be able to. Even the idea of the restructuring. I know I said I would be able to, but I've realized I won't be able to. You may find you're having to change some previous yeses to nos this week. And so Saturn can bring a lot of this realization about how we're managing our time and energy. And there may be some frustration in that, but it is bringing forward that wisdom and maturity. And I think you can learn a lot by who or what is irritating or frustrating you, and to reflect on in what ways did I contribute to this situation being as pressured as it is. Because if we can get to that place, then we're fully empowered to make different choices in the future so we don't end up in a situation like this again. One of the pieces of wisdom that Saturn often tries to teach us could be summarized as less is more. And the idea that actually doing less will allow you to do better, and that by channeling your efforts based on your planning, your preparation, your long-term intentions and goals, you'll ultimately be more effective over time. So with Mars square Saturn, you might be kind of working through, this sense that this is less about what you're going to achieve in the short term and more about how what you're involved in is contributing to the successes and stability for your future self. If right now you're doing stuff to kind of stay busy, to pass the time, to indulge a passing interest or passion, Saturn might be letting you know that its preference is for you to reallocate your time, energy, and resources to a more deserving, higher quality, lasting project, person, or partnership. And as a general tip, I know we talked about a lot of different pieces of Mars-Saturn, both astrological and some of the ways this shows up in real life. Anytime Saturn is in the mix, going slower, doing less, being more thoughtful and considered is going to be a helpful strategy for success. If we think about the planets based on the signs that they're in and where they are in their individual journeys, Saturn in Pisces is really trying to work on completion and closure. This is the final few months, really 2 and a bit months, I guess, of Saturn in Pisces. So Saturn in Pisces is trying to wrap up projects, to bring things to completion, a restructuring process that started back in March of 2023. So Saturn is really like, I'm very close to the finish line here. I'm almost done. I just want to keep going to get that big win that I've been striving for a couple of years. And Mars has kind of shown up, pushing and prodding, making some demands, maybe distracting, maybe bringing a pressing matter. And so with this square aspect between Mars and Saturn, you'll perhaps need to make some really wise choices, remind yourself of what you've been working on for a couple of years, and perhaps where you can, rein in those wild short-term impulses wherever possible. That'll help you stay on track with that bigger project that you've been working on really hard for some time now. Another technical feature to do with the planets in this aspect, Mars is in Sagittarius, Saturn is in Pisces. And so this particular Mars square Saturn aspect sees Mars and Saturn both in signs ruled by Jupiter. And of course, Jupiter is over in Cancer. So this is a clue that whatever you're navigating right now, whatever choice or major decision you're facing or you're working through, it is ultimately designed to help you kind of serve your journey that is about meaning, belonging, and building a more nourishing life. So if you get a bit stuck in the push-pull or the back and forward of Mars and Saturn, you might find going back to what Jupiter and Cancer is trying to bring forward for you helpful to guide you at this point. Is this ultimately going to be more nourishing for me? Is this going to enhance my sense of security? Is this going to help me create a deeper sense of belonging and connection with the people that really matter? And is this going to put me closer to a pathway of purpose? That is a very Jupiter thing, and the extent to which your path may have diverged from something purposeful, this could be a readjusting, maybe even a getting back on track time. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode. If you are interested to join us in Palm Springs in January, I look forward to meeting with you in person then. I hope this episode has given you a few different ways of thinking about the Mars square Saturn aspect this week. It is technically a more challenging aspect, and even still, there are things we can do to kind of draw on this energy in a very practical, constructive way in our lives. Let me know how you're experiencing this aspect in the comments below. If you have any other questions about astrology, I would love to hear them as I plan out shows for the year ahead. So drop your questions or conundrums with astrology in the comment section below, and I will keep them in mind for a future episode. I'll be back to share more again soon. Until then, take care.